On today's video and now podcast, I will be doing a review, an educational review on another issue of an American Journal of Civil Defense Survive. This time it'll be on Survive Volume 2, Number 1. This will be from January to February of 1969. I'm going to go through a few of the sections, and I've made some notes here that I'd like to cover as I go. Among Survive writers, Caston M. Howland. Born in Saskatchewan and moved to North Dakota in 1939, served as an Army officer in World War II in Korea. He obtained a degree in physics from St. Olaf College and received a Master's of Science from the University of Minnesota. He later joined the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in 1964. Next is John Cossetten, I'm sorry if I butchered that, Curry. Born in Missouri and moved to Oklahoma. Three-time winner of Freedom's Foundation George Washington Honor Medal. Awards also include Gavel Certificate of Merit from the American Bar Association and Good Citizen Gold Medal of the Society of the Sons of American Revolution. Mr. Curry is also a graduate from the Air Command and Staff College, the Foreign Service Institute, and the American Institute of Foreign Trade. He also saw extensive service in top levels of intelligence of the intelligence field with the White House, Pentagon, and U.S. Air Force. L.W. Baldwin, 15 years of field experience based in agriculture. Soviet versus U.S. Offensive Missiles by Karsten M. Howland. Soviet versus U.S. missiles. This is referencing a February 22nd, 1968 report by former Secretary McNamara. Again stated, the megatonnage was not a good indicator of destructive power. A better measure of a nuclear weapon is separately targetable, serviceable, accurate, and reliable warheads. A listing of the approximate number of warheads listed in the table below, which I'm scrolling down to now for Table 1. Military assets are typically spread out over areas, so a larger blast area from a single missile would be less effective than more accurate, smaller warheads. However, civil targets would require a larger megatonnage weapon, as civilian populations are more spread out. Lift capacity counts. And as scrolling down in Table 2, lift capacity of the combined pounds that are directed in an ICBM trajectory, which in 1969 is 5,500 nautical miles, changing from large megatonnage warheads to multiple warheads, can be a massive cost savings. Soviet nuclear power estimated. The estimates of megatonnage and missile fleet estimate the Soviet ICBM force would be capable of destroying every U.S. hardened missile silo and its contents. This is assuming the silos are not protected by anti-missile systems. Soviet MIRV, or Multiple Independent Targetable Reentry Vehicle Deployment foggy. Intelligence in recent time has vastly underestimated the opponent's power. Examples given are the Soviet H-bomb technology, Cuban resistance in the Bay of Pigs, and the Viet Cong. Next, the author questions and offers possibilities if the Soviets had a coordinated and intelligence-guided attack towards silos, bombers, and submarines. Howland then asks, if this does occur, the policy of MAD, mutually assured destruction, count not to be maintained, and if it can be maintained, what are the chances the Soviets could exploit this option? This article adds that the USA questions the capability of the Soviet military systems. Additionally, the author states the difficulty with two superior forces is that both have strong secretive areas. He writes the possible solution to this is to have vastly larger offensive and defensive forces. So Be It, by Don F. Geyer. The author, Don F. Geyer, begins his article reviewing the nuclear review that administrations go through. The most recent, at time of the article's writing, is Richard Nixon. The history of civil defense in the United States is the nuclear era is characterized by repeated cycles. Each sequence begins with a rediscovery of the problem. The problem undergoes intensive study, followed by some positive recommendations. The recommendations meet real and imagined objectives, leading finally to interaction and reburial of the issue. The United States, though it did not need to worry due to being the only country with a nuclear weapon, that is until 1949 when Russia detonated its first nuclear weapon, followed them by US and Russia testing thermonuclear weapons. With the threat growing of nuclear weapons, Eisenhower made a special study committee which released the Geyer Report. The report was made close to the time of Sputnik. Sputnik confirmed the Soviets' ability to have a working intercontinental ballistic missile. This was when the recommendation of nuclear shelter program was suggested, but Eisenhower did not move forward with the shelter program due to the estimated $20 billion cost. Dulles felt that building shelters in America would imply a willingness to withdraw. He feared this would hurt the mutual security agreements he had worked on for years. However, the Constitution section to provide for a common defense gave the Civil Defense Agency director a seat on the National Security Council. While the Geyer Committee was finalizing its report for the president, the Rockefeller Fund was also working on a report directed by then Professor Henry Kissinger, who became President Nixon's National Security Advisor. The Kissinger report strongly recommended strong civil defense preparations. Before Nixon, Kennedy had strong support for civil defense. However, before his death, support began to stop. Then during President Johnson's time in office, Kennedy's civil defense goals disappeared. The new Secretary of Defense, An Appraisal, by John Costin Curry. Nixon's Secretary of Defense, Melvin Laird, wrote a book in 1962 called A House Divided. The author suggests that with Laird's relative young age of 46, he is bold enough to present his ideas, but also educated enough to listen and assess other opinions. A House Divided is different from other, at the time, current books, where he suggests we as America need to know what we stand for. If life itself is most important, or is the way life is lived more important? From A House Divided, this is a quote, "We must have the will and the capacity to fight and win decisively. Civil defense becomes important, and eventually the nuclear war must not leave us so prostrate that our republic cannot continue." Our vulnerable bread basket. Mr. Baldwin reminds the reader that historical, man-made, and natural disasters have had noticeable impact on food production and livestock. Food has also been a major factor in disaster recovery. Through several wars, food has still been available to the general population by only 6% of that population. This has caused society to forget that food scarcity is like. Even though there has been much research into nuclear fallout, there is not enough data or confident estimates on food production and distribution. The primary food for the United States is flour, cereal, meat, and fish, and that's shown here in Table 1. And this is for 1965 from the statistics of the USDA 1966. The U.S. food market is crafted around this production, transportation, and processing. Needing to change this infrastructure will take time, and doing this during a nuclear disaster will not be fast. Food will be impacted in 3 ways. Beta radiation damage from direct contact and food deposits near plant parts, tissue damage from gamma radiation, and third, uptake of radioactive nucleotides from soil during plant growth. As of October 1967, the estimated Soviet intercontinental force was between 4,000 and 14,000 megatons, and deliverable by their 1,000 warheads. At the top of this article is a really great quote. People must eat, particularly nuclear attack survivors. The more numerous the survivors, the greater are the survival and recovery problems in terms of food. Professor L.B. Baldwin, a serious student in both agriculture and nuclear attack fields, here throws a reviving light on potential farm production and nuclear post-attack situations. And that's what was just covered in those few recaps of this article. This information is further modified by the fact that even the most serious of radioactive soil contamination will be so weakened within a year's time that the soil will be again fit for food crops. This is possible due to the rapid decay rate of fallout radiation, coupled with national food surplus goods for over 18 months that gives room for considerable hope if survival and recovery planning are seriously developed. Animal products supply 40% of the food energy, 68% of the protein, and 83% of the calcium in the American diet. Cattle provide the greater portion of these quantities, as is shown in Table 1, which is up here. And Table 1 goes over what I spoke about a little ago for flour, cereal, and the different things down to eggs. And it goes over pounds per capita for 1966 from the USDA again, and energy supplied from those items. These animals are vulnerable to the effects of fallout, since they are generally kept on pasture most of their lives and would consume fallout particles retained on forage grasses, as well as being subjected to contact with fallout particles retained on their coats. And on Table 3, it shows total radiation dose delivered in 4 days or less that will kill 1/2 of exposed livestock. And it notes down here, it can be seen from this data that livestock can tolerate very little more radiation than humans, who have a median lethal dose tolerance of 450 rads. And that's equal to swine, and cattle is a little more, but not by too much. And then poultry is double what humans are at 900. Nuclear attack and the resultant fallout would produce an immediate food supply crisis, primarily due to difficulties in harvesting, processing, and transporting available supplies. Many of these difficulties can be overcome by emergency planning and food storage. The long-range problems, which must be overcome if famine is to be averted, require the knowledge and capability of reestablishing crop acreage and livestock population, while at the same time supplying adequate food to the surviving population. Rapid excavation, significance, needs, and opportunities. A technical report analysis by Morris W. Self. This report was written to direct the attention of industrial, governmental, and academic organizations toward research activities that will accelerate the development of underground excavation technology. A major problem created by the urban complex is the construction of transportation and utility systems without disturbing living patterns or defiling the natural environment. The problem is complicated by the random intermix of land use for living industry and surviving agriculture. The rapidly expanding urbanization has forced planners to direct their attention to present-day knowledge and construction methods rather than adjust their planning to technological capabilities of the future. Of course, there are other deterrents to the general acceptance of subterranean construction. One is economics, not just in the sense that a cubic yard of subsurface excavation costs more than a cubic yard of surface excavation, example of open trench type excavation, but rather that it is presently impossible to evaluate the balance costs versus benefits. The current practice of evaluating process investments only on the basis of market costs and without particular regard for attendant social costs and benefits. This frequently results in rejection of subterranean facilities on the basis of cost lines, when in fact, such facilities may appreciably further the public interest. Other obstacle is sociological. The almost instinctive, claustrophobic rejection of subsurface living, working or traveling, can override rational, objective evaluation. An important part of city planning that was completely overlooked by the committee is proven for shelter against the efforts of nuclear attack. Not only will disaster survival become more important in the concept of megapolises, large cities, but the proposed subterranean facilities will greatly enhance civil defense capabilities. This point has been emphasized in earlier issues of Survive. The technical mole shown is being employed to drive soft ground tunnels in San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART system. And that is the picture that is referenced up here on the title page. So this picture shows the machine tunneling through with the bit or system up front, and then the cars and everything taking out the back and the system working. After 20 miles of the 75-mile system, about 20 miles of the 75-mile system will be underground, with 64,000 feet of 18-foot diameter soft ground tunnels. Normal tunnel ventilation will be provided by the piston action of trains moving through the tunnel. Air escape shafts are being built at each end of the subway station and along the line at 1,500 to 2,500 foot intervals. Walkways within the tunnels will connect all stations and cross passages at roughly 1,000 foot intervals. Will enable passengers to evacuate a smoke-filled or otherwise dangerous tunnel in case of emergency. The BART system will undoubtedly enhance the civil defense posture in San Francisco area. But it is unfortunate that dual-purpose shelter was not brought into the original planning. Much of the system's potential for civil defense has been lost. The total cost of the BART system will be about $1.2 billion. And again, this is in 1969. In the future, passenger trains may be pushed by air pressure and pulled by gravity to speeds of 400 miles per hour through steel tubes over half mile below the ground surface. This capability is possible in the Gravity Vacuum Transit, or GVT, system developed by L.K. Edwards. Again, civil defense could benefit tremendously by being considered in the early planning of such projects. The GVT stations would make ideal blast and fallout shelters with little modification of the primary design characteristics. The trains and tunnels could provide efficient means of evacuation if necessary. Even ignoring civil defense, the Committee on Rapid Evacuation has revealed enough of the potential value of subsurface excavation to show its vital peacetime importance to the future of urban America. However, at this precarious stage in history, the civil defense value of subsurface excavation may well outweigh all other values. This support should lead to a utilization of rapid evacuation excavation benefits, which America cannot afford to forego. That ends the article. The next thing is some notes and about the current president at the time in 1969 and some feedback and some other areas. What I'd like to go over in this is what can be taken away from this as a whole. And I think it's really important to go over the reminder of how to prepare, not just for nuclear circumstances, while that is always a possibility. I think the message in this, in current times of 2023, is having the ability to know what our society needs for sustenance and food, and to have a backup plan for that. Because the percentage, I believe, has gone down from 6% for the population that produces our food. We're also very focused now on outside food coming in from different parts of the world. And if there's one thing that I think the world learned over the last few years, was supply chains are very precarious, and the smallest thing can just throw a wrench into everything. And we need to have more of a capacity locally to be able to produce food. And on top of that, we need to have a way to produce food and store food that can last for a longer period of time to handle hiccups in the supply system, which we have all seen in recent years. And in addition to that, if we can build in the capacity to have radioactive protection in place, with the concept of outside grazing animals and plants that are harvested for those animals and for people and for fuel and for the surface. Because in this article, it mentions a time period of about a year where the soil and plants would be able to come back from the half-life of the material that would come down from a radioactive incident. And there's a book called 1 Second After, and it goes over, it's a different circumstance. It goes over an electromagnetic pulse. But the concept is the same. You know, having a year of disruption is catastrophic, and there will be massive death from the amount of food and industry that cannot occur because of all the radiation and because of all the sickness and because of the secondary sickness from, eating plants and animals that are contaminated. Because at some point, people will get very desperate, and they will get to the point where they need to eat something and they're willing to take the risk. And that's going to cause more death and more of a hindrance on the system as a whole of healthcare and many other areas, because those people will then be sick. And that's why I'm a big advocate of being self-sufficient to some degree of food storage. I consider it insurance, just like health insurance and life insurance and a 401k. It's the same way. You have food storage, because if you don't have food, nothing else is going to happen and things will get very desperate. So I think, in all this being said, I like the concept of society looking at things like subway tunnels and subterranean infrastructure for public safety. And I think that is something that should be reconsidered. And with new technologies like the Boring Company from Elon Musk and other tunneling projects like the Channel in Europe, there's clear ability to technologically be able to do this. And hopefully there will someday be a way where we can expand our ability in the civilian world to have subterranean transportation, shopping, living, shopping centers, and medical care. And that way it's safer for everyone, from tornadoes, natural disasters, hurricanes. If those things are underground and maintained properly and hardened correctly above ground for your air and power and those infrastructure needs, then society will have some degree of survivability. Now, with that being said, at the time of reading this is just a few days after the earthquake in Turkey in the start of 2023. And the severity of that earthquake is just, there are no words to describe how bad that is. And whatever system would be made needs to make sure that it can handle, if we're going to build it as safe haven, and if we could take that view, that lens of how we grow society, then that will add, if we can add severe earthquake protection into it, it will give even more capacity to be able to come back from a major natural disaster or severe man-made disaster if that's what occurs. Thank you for listening and watching if you're watching this on the internet. And I will hopefully make another article come out faster next time. I'm working on a format for this to work. It's very chunky, and I understand that right now. So I am attempting to make it more streamlined. Thank you again.